Hello, thank you for joining me. I'm Flora, speaking out. What a sad, disastrous week lies behind us. So much soul searching. Since the murder of Charlie Kirk, particularly tragic, coming only 3 months after the assassination of the Democrat Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband in Minnesota, shot by an extremist dressed in a police uniform as a disguise. People have been saying all week, this is not what we are. But all too often, it is exactly what we are. When extremists, by whatever name or in whatever party, get their hands on guns and or legal power and decide to use force and violence. All my life, and I'm beginning about 1935, 90 years ago, when I began to perceive what was going on in the nation at 7 years old. All my life, I have seen political violence going on one way or another. Beginning perhaps with the general uproar over the Ku Klux Klan, which was just reaching its political height in the years perhaps when I was born, 28, up through the mid-30s. In fact, a couple of years before I was born, I think I've mentioned before, they marched down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., 6 or 7, 15, 20, I don't know, abreast, being cheered from the sidelines. And we make a mistake if we think they were only interested in abuse of race or religion. They were violently political. They tried to control who would be elected in towns, states, nation, for any party that shared their terrorist views. They were even aiming hopefully for the presidency. It was political violence. Well, I could go on. I have to just touch on these things. I'd be thinking of, for example, the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago. Look that up if you need to. The violence of the police abusing the crowds demonstrating. All right, take us then through the uproars, upheavals of the late 60s, early 70s, when it was really extremist against extremists, from the weathermen and the extreme left who blew up buildings in protest, to the extreme rightists, the shooting of the students demonstrating at Kent State University by the National Guard. We could go on through the assassinations, John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, the attempt on Reagan, President Reagan, of course, up to the January 6th attack on Capitol building. Oh, and not to forget, let's take us back 30 years, 1995, the attack of the extreme rightist Timothy McVeigh, who blew up the federal building in Oklahoma City, killing 168 people and 19 babies, little children. Well, we could go on. You can look all these things up. Many of you remember them. What am I learning? And believe me, I still have a lot to learn. I'm learning that extremism is found in all political movements without exception, and religion too, unfortunately, and professions, and households. Extremism as the underbelly or on the edges, or sometimes controlling at the top. I'm thinking right now about 3 different types of extremism. One is found in the extremism of ideology, that yours interpretation of truth matters more than anything else. Everyone else is wrong, and you will use any means necessary to get your opinion across. No one else is worth anything. The ideological extremism. Then there is the extremism of power lust. You or me, family, team, race, nation, must be in control on top, no matter what. That matters more than anything. And of course, sometimes you get a combination of the ideological extreme and the power lust extreme together. Then, of course, you have a very dangerous situation. But the third kind of extremism I'm thinking of, it's the extremism of despair, where you're jobless and no new job in sight, and months go on, and your family begins to get hungry, can't afford doctors, medication. Your human rights, you believe, are being taken away. No hope in sight. When you reach that point, individually or communally, nothing else matters but some hope, some survival. And the extremism of despair, of course, is what leads to the bloody revolutions like that of France or Russia back in history. What do these forms of extremism have in common? Potential danger, great potential danger. They have hate, vengeance, demonizing, dehumanizing others who stand in our way, and perhaps worst of all, when you're in the extremism of despair mainly, you are open to any other extremist who needs control or has an ideology. You're a victim of them because you will believe the promises they make, that they will fix everything. It's the point where violence is the only answer, as the extremists see it. Now, we're hearing all kinds of advice. Tone down the rhetoric. Listen to one another. Honor one another. I loved it when another young political senatorial candidate the other day said, democracy is a spiritual practice where we learn to listen to each other, hear each other more than listen, and respect each other, which is wonderful. But what do you do if your opposition is not willing to listen or enter into rational debate? What do you do then? It's not enough to tone down rhetoric or start the disciplining of listening because no one wants to hear. They want to force their view. What do you do then? I remember back in the uproars of the 60s and 70s when the extremes were meeting head on. Our country was in great danger then of some kind of volcanic explosion. In the big city in which we were living at that time, there was demonstrations going on in the streets against the Vietnam War, the military-industrial complex, it was called. And the National Guard was called into our city. And I remember one Sunday morning, not only the smell of the tear gas in the air, but the National Guard, for some reason, surrounded our church. I don't know if they were more afraid of what was being expressed in our church or by the crowd outside. Some of the women took out coffee and rolls, which was lovely as far as it went. Our pastor, a very wonderful, wise man, went out into the street and asked the demonstrators to send in half a dozen people who would explain what they stood for to the church congregation. I've never forgotten that Sunday. They came in, dressed in every possible way, all of us in our Sunday best, and explained what they felt the demonstration was all about, and their grievances, and the despair they felt at anything changing. And we, the congregation, listened. There was give and take. Now that was beautiful as far as it went. But what do you do when the opposition will not talk, will not listen, will not debate, but just wants to force you into a direction? Are we at the point yet in our situation now where we've crossed the line of no return? Some people feel we have. I don't feel that way yet. I think our federal government is not yet an extremist organization, but we certainly have extremist men and women, ideologically and power lustful, in positions of enormous power in our federal government. We're edging close to it. I'm not at the point where I feel that our federal government is one of political violence. We're not yet killing those we are sending forcibly out of the country. We're edging towards it because not only did in 2020, January 6th, the president at that time urging crowds on the Congressional building of the United States violently. Also, he's federalizing the National Guard, sending into the cities against the protests of the governor of those states or the mayors of those cities where there's no riots going on, nothing violent happening, but to show the power. That is an act of political violence. You don't have to kill people to be violent. You can just force them, brainwash them, cut out their rights. Also, the treatment of the innocent immigrants. We're not talking about criminals. They're going after, as well, innocent men, women, and young people. Manacling them, putting them in holding pens, sending them off to violent countries. This is political violence. And bit by bit, human rights are being challenged and attacked, taken away if possible. This is political violence. We're edging close to a crisis point. Okay, what do we do before we cross the line? And when the line comes, if you crossed it, sometimes there is civil war, or like the American Revolution, or the stopping of the Nazis by armies. That point can come, but I don't think we're there yet. What to do to prevent us from getting to that point? I will tell you another story to illustrate what I mean. Some years ago, my husband fell off a ladder. No observable injuries, but he was lying without moving on the ground when I found him, conscious, but barely. I knew what to do. My wonderful mother had drilled into us what to do in family emergencies. I kept him, told him to stay where he was. I covered him with a blanket. I asked someone in the house to call emergency, an ambulance, and I stayed with him. Okay, they put us both in the ambulance and took us to the emergency ward. He was taken off immediately into another room, put behind one of those curtains. No treatment yet, no doctor yet. He was asking out loud, I heard him, for me to come. No reason why I shouldn't. He was not yet being treated. I tried to go to him, and a certain intern, I think it was an intern, apparently very impressed with his own authority and power, said I could not enter. I said, my husband's calling for me. He said, I won't let you enter. Well, this was at one point where extremism almost met the other. I could feel the rage rising in me. He was gripped by power extremism. I was increasingly gripped by rage. I could have almost torn him to pieces if he hadn't let me in. At that moment, the doctor appeared and looked from one of us to the other. And I explained what I wanted to do, what my husband wanted, and that this in turn was blocking me. She turned to him calmly and very firmly and outlined to him patients' rights. Apparently he didn't know about it. And then after she put him in firmly in his place with the facts and the legal implications, she turned to me and said, yes, of course, you can see your husband. Treatment hasn't begun. But before you go, I would like you to take a few deep breaths. You're already in shock from your husband's accident, and you're now in a state of extreme anger. Just a few deep breaths, and then you'll be ready. So I did what she said and was allowed in with my husband. I think that incident remained with me for many reasons. One, as we approach the crisis in our government, in the extremes on the left and the right, at these town halls, stop screaming at whatever representative or senators in front of us, venting rage. Rather, present them calmly and firmly with facts, truth based on evidence, statistics based on evidence. Calmly, loudly, firmly show them the evidence and ask, and then listen to what they say. Usually they have no answer when presented with the actual evidence. What's more, let groups form that know their rights and are willing to state loudly, firmly, and go to law if necessary. I was delighted to hear universities are getting together after they've been bulldozed and bullied by the federal government. Let them get together and know their rights and go to the courts. I'm glad groups like that are forming. I am hoping now each party, and a wise woman I talked to recently said, and I hadn't quite thought of it this way, each party, right or left, is responsible for toning down, controlling the extremist in their own group. This wise person also said to me, perhaps this had to happen. America was always a tremendous risky experiment. You might call it a crucible. We've always been, right from the beginning, a mixture of various different types of people. There's 13 original colonies, different nations, different languages, different religions. It will fascinate you to know that this week, 238 years ago, in 1787, the Constitution was finally formed and completely signed. We should be celebrating that this week, 238 years ago, the Constitution. Let's all learn what our Constitution is trying to tell us and present that to one another, and to the extremists give the facts. What is that? One of our national mottos, excuse the Latin that I never really learned, e pluribus unum, which means out of the many comes the one. The balance, the many, and also the one. Thank you for being here and thinking with me. See you next time.